Well, good morning, everybody, once again. My talk this morning is entitled Life Beyond Death, the Immortal Soul. And I chose this subject because I myself am extremely curious about the journey of the soul beyond this body. And I don't consider the contemplation of the mystery of death to be a morbid thing. I believe it's because of the fact that we have just a finite amount of time in this body that we want to live the fullest, richest, most meaningful life possible. My first spiritual teacher, Michael Singer, said, "Death is not a morbid thought. It is the greatest teacher in all life." A wise person affirms, "If with one breath all this could change, then I want to live at the highest level while I'm alive." I used to live in Ashland a couple of years ago, and I got close to a Tibetan Lama up there who led meditation and taught classes at the Buddhist Center. And I took a class. I'm hearing some noise. Maybe Shyla, could you mute? Maybe I'm not sure. I took a class on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and this woman Lama, this wise woman Lama, I remember her saying in the first class, she said, "Death is natural. It is normal. It happens to everyone, and we should get comfortable with it and get past the denial, past the avoidance and the dread, and be curious about the experience of it. The fact that it's inevitable should urge us all towards greater diligence in our spiritual practice. So we make the utmost effort to use our time to the best advantage." And we were talking earlier uh, about how, having this deadly virus lurking for the last 10 months now has probably made us all more aware that our days are a blessing. And we don't take them for granted because we never know how many days we have. We just lost Larry King yesterday to COVID. But it reminds us how much we love life and we want to stay alive and we want to share love one more day. And we want our loved ones to stay. We realize how precious this day is, each day is. So, to understand the journey of the soul, the mystery of the journey of the soul, and to explore the deathless self that all these scriptures and the great spiritual masters speak of, we look to the greatest masters and their teachings. And both Jesus and Buddha are described as transcending death. And they're described as transcending death in different ways. I think you're probably more perhaps familiar of the story of Jesus's resurrection. He died, and after 3 days, he rose into a resurrected body. And then he existed in that resurrected body for about 40 days. And then he ascended into heaven. And the description, you can find the description of his resurrected body, and it's different than his earthly body before death. In his resurrected body, he could suddenly appear and disappear. In the locked upper room, Jesus suddenly appeared in the midst of his disciples. He did not have to eat or rest, and his resurrected body was able to ascend when his earthly ministry was finished. So there was what seems to be a more subtle body that Jesus inhabited after bodily death for those 40 days. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, they speak of a transitional period in between dying and rebirth that they call the bardos. And this period lasts as long as 40 days. And they describe the experience you have as being only mind. You are only mind since you no longer have a body. And they say if you've made a lot of effort in this life in meditative practice and you have some mastery at quieting and concentrating your mind, you have much more ability to control your experience during this time in the bardo state. Um, in my view, Jesus obviously had great mastery over his mind. And so I sense that he was likely so powerful that he could make himself seen to his disciples, even though he was in that bardo state, and offer some final teachings to them. In Tibetan Buddhism, if you've become spiritually masterful in this life, it's possible to achieve full enlightenment in the Bardo. They talk about that a lot. It's one of the deepest teachings, one of the more advanced teachings. And that means to emerge fully into the light and to be free from being reborn. And to me, that is synonymous with ascension. Like the way the Christians describe Jesus's ascension is that he now sits at the right hand of God. The Buddhists call that nirvana. They call that enlightenment. Now, the story of Buddha and his transcending death is a little different, but it's really interesting. You may have heard the story of Siddhartha. Siddhartha became the Buddha. Um, Before his enlightenment, he was a prince, and his father was a king, and his father wanted him to become a king eventually. And his father was told by a prophet that Siddhartha was destined to be this great spiritual master that would have a huge effect on the world. But his father didn't want that for him. He wanted him to be a king. And so he sheltered Siddhartha. He kept him in the palace grounds and he created this kind of false reality where there was no suffering. It was just like this paradise reality where there was no illness and no aging and no death. And at one point, finally, Siddhartha, I think they say he was 29 years old. He got really curious. What is beyond the palace grounds? And so he got his attendant Chana, and they went for an expedition, and they left the palace grounds. And so there's a story about how he saw four things on this excursion outside of this paradise reality that really changed him, that hugely affected him and just dramatically changed his life. The first thing he saw is he saw a man that was sick, which shocked and disturbed him because he'd never seen illness. He'd never suffered from illness. The next thing he saw was a man that was old. And that was really upsetting. He'd never seen old age. It had been hidden from him in the palace grounds. And the third thing Siddhartha saw was a dead body, and he couldn't comprehend it. And he asked his attendant Chana, "What is that?" And Chana replied, "That is the destiny for every one of us in the body. That is death, and we all die." And Siddhartha was deeply grieved at this realization. And then the fourth thing he saw was a yogi. He saw this ascetic that was meditating, and he was in a very deep state of meditation. He was very serene and sitting in deep concentration, even in the midst of all this suffering in the world. And Siddhartha realized that this yogi was discovering there is a way out of all this suffering, all this worldly suffering. And that way out was to realize one's true nature beyond being identified with the body. And so Siddhartha decided in that moment to dedicate his life to awakening, and he deserted his life as a prince. He never went back to the palace. He actually had a wife and a kid, and he didn't go back. He found a tree, a beautiful Bodhi tree, and he sat under that tree for a number of years, and he meditated, and he realized his true nature. He became enlightened. And so then upon his death, he merged into light, into nirvana. So that's a story of overcoming death in a different way. And it's a different story than Jesus' story. But both of the teachings, the teachings they both offer, is to realize who we truly are. The I am before the I am the body. The I am after I am the body. The I am, the teachings. The Buddha doesn't call it the I am, but that's what we're familiar with. And the teachings from both of those traditions, and really from all spiritual traditions, focus on one essential thing, and that's that how we live, how we're living now, determines our death experience and what happens after that. If we have concentrated our attention in this life on truth, on love, on peace, on wisdom, that will carry over. If instead we've placed our attention on selfishness, on anger and unforgiveness and resentments and pridefulness, that carries over. So you might ask, carries over to where? Carries over to what? Very good question. That brings me to the discussion of reincarnation. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, founders of Unity, believed in reincarnation. Listen to this quote from Charles Fillmore I found this week. He said, "The teaching that man in his spiritual ego lives over and over in many personalities is as old as religion itself, because it is found in every religion under the sun. It has been taught in India and China, in Egypt and Palestine. In fact, every nation, ancient and modern, has its great teachers who accepted and expounded in some degree this universally understood reality of man's personal life, of reincarnation." And when you read some of the things Jesus said, he he was he was clearly speaking about reincarnation in the Gospel of Matthew. He said, "And if you're willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. He is Elijah." People at that time generally accepted that John the Baptist had been Elijah in an earlier life. And Jesus, of course, was a Jew. And the mystical tradition of Judaism, I've been studying the Kabbalah lately, it has deep teachings on reincarnation. They're similar to Buddhism, but a little different. And it's great to study them all because you get some pieces that are missing in other religions. But what's interesting is that the early Christian church accepted reincarnation, the doctrine of reincarnation. And it actually wasn't until about 553 AD that the Second Council of Constantinople declared reincarnation was heresy, right? And I've wondered why did they do that? And they extricated out the idea of the reincarnation of the soul, and it seems they felt it afforded man too much time to strive for salvation. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, they they just couldn't see God being so compassionate as to give man many lifetimes to achieve salvation, realization, awakening. So let me read you something from Myrtle, because Myrtle Fillmore, in her healing letters, she writes very explicitly about this journey of the soul, about reincarnation. She says, "Those who find it a burden to stay in the body and go through the change called death will find that they are still a living soul, and they will again desire to live and to unfold and to make use of the life which we now know. So they will again be attracted to those who will help them build the physical body, and they will be born again as babes." The doctrine of reincarnation can be likened to life on earth as a school. Life on earth as a school that contains many grades, many classrooms. My mom always, the quote that my mom says to me more than any other quote is, "Kathy, this is our school. We're here on our school. We're here to learn." And the education is basically to eventually graduate from a limited egoic awareness into cosmic consciousness. All this time in isolation, which mostly I don't mind. I'm kind of a monk anyway, but I've really gone deeper in my spiritual practice. And I was sharing this earlier that I just feel like I want to make the most of this particular life and incarnation. And I've been looking at the two things that I think keep you on the wheel of rebirth, of death, and then rebirth, and then life. And that is attachment, attachments, and latent desires. And so I've been just looking so deeply at that and so deeply at the conditioning, even having dreams about it. And I think my deepest attachments are to my family members. And I imagine that's probably true for us all, that our deepest attachments are to our partner, our loved one, and our family. And of course, that's natural to our human hearts. The only way, to overcome our deepest attachments is to truly realize oneness, not as a concept, but as a direct experience where we know we can never be separate. And, in form, we will eventually have to be apart for a while. But the only way that I can see, and that from studying all the scripture, that we can not suffer from that, is to awaken our consciousness to a higher level and transcend our ordinary consciousness often. And so this is what I'm working on, and this is what I trust you're working on. And it's deep work. It requires deep work to discover true freedom. I think I've talked a little bit about it before, but I had a profound experience being with my father the last 2 weeks of his life, especially the last couple days. You know, we were in a hospice wing of the hospital, and it was just him and I. The hospice nurses mostly just left us alone. And he was in a coma, but I could tell he was totally aware of my presence. There was one moment where I told him it was Easter Sunday, and I wished that I could take him to Aunt Sarah's for her wonderful Easter Sunday meal. And because that's where we always went, that's where he loved to go. And I kissed him. I leaned over and kissed him on the forehead with this just gentle, kind of a long kiss, and this big giant tear just rolled down his face. And I knew he might have been in a coma, but that he completely heard me and he completely understood me. And something happened during this time being with my dad. I'd never been with anyone dying, but I knew exactly what to do and how to help him make the transition. I felt like a divine escort in a way, like I knew how to help him get comfortable with the other realm, with the formless realm, and with what the Buddhists call the bardos. And the way that I felt I helped him was I helped him feel safe and fearless, and helped him feel peace and feel loved and just able to let go. And it was just all guided. It was all intuitive. And I felt I could merge my mind with his and give him stillness and give him peace. And that we were able to kind of go into the formless being together, and just be bliss and peace, and then come back, practice really. We did this for a couple days, and it was so beautiful. It was so full of light, and I just felt like I was kind of taking his hand and showing him that he could safely let go of the body and merge in love and merge in peace. And I could tell he was experiencing that because his face just became more and more beautiful, more and more relaxed, and he had a beautiful passing. And after he passed, he made his transition, I felt so close to him where he was. And I felt him drawing on my love and consciousness. And he would come to me in dreams. I would just have these lucid dreams. And in the dreams, he was about 30 years old. He was in his prime, and he was like lit from within. He looked different. I knew it was him, but he looked different. He was beautiful. He was really at peace, and he came to tell me that he was very, very well, and that he was deeply at peace. And this went on for about 40 days. I felt this connection with him. I didn't want to do anything else except kind of hold this space for him. And then after about 40 days, something changed. No more dreams. And it's interesting because the Buddhists say you incarnate in a period of 49 days. So something happened. I felt like he went somewhere where I couldn't reach him so much anymore. But that experience of being with my dad in his passing, that was the greatest gift that I believe I gave him in his whole life. And it was the greatest gift he gave me, because I know how beautiful and conscious our passing can be. And the Buddha said that it's so important to have at least one person with you that's conscious that can help you transition. He said, if you can find a friend to go with you, interesting, who is steady, careful, and mature, spiritually mature, together you can overcome all hardships with mindfulness and joy. And he also said that at the time of death, only spiritual accomplishments will be of any worth. Similar to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who said, love is really the only thing we can possess, keep with us, and take with us. Love is all we can take with us, love and our spiritual accomplishments. So before I close, I'd like to share a little bit more about the description of the bardos. And I encourage you to explore this and learn more about this. Um, One Buddhist teacher I really like, Dr. Andrew Holisek, he explains the three bardos that we experience from the time we are dying to the time we are born, as the first one is the painful bardo of dying. The second one is the luminous bardo of dharmata. And the third one is the karmic bardo of becoming. The bardo of dying is obvious, and it need not be painful. It can be very peaceful and conscious. It's so important that one leaves in peace and not in a state of fear. And it's also really important that the person has forgiven and they've let go of all the blockages in their heart. That second bardo, the luminous bardo of dharmata, that's what we hear described in near death experiences. People see loved ones and they see the form of the divine that they relate to, that they love, and they see the clear white light and they feel tremendous love. I have a friend that had a near death experience, and it's wonderful when she describes it. I feel like I go there, I go into that bardo. The third bardo is called the karmic bardo, and that's the journey towards finding new parents that Myrtle actually described in that quote, of finding new parents, choosing them, and joining them at the point of conception. But to me, the most interesting bardo is that middle one, the dharmata, because in that stage, we are just mind. We're no longer body. And everything we see is a display of our mind. And if we have meditated, if we've learned to not be fully identified with thoughts, we're able to do this in that middle bardo, and it's very beneficial. And if not, it can be a confusing time. I was with someone who was getting close to passing a few years ago in the hospital visiting, and they were so agitated, and they were just fearful, and I could feel the restlessness in them. And it would have been really beneficial if they could have been more prepared to make that transition peacefully and without that fear. The Tibetans have a beautiful practice for someone who has just left the body. They chant and they gently say the name of the person, and they remind them they've left the body and that everyone leaves the body. They say that you've died and you can go into the light now. And they keep reminding them of that. And that's really helpful for people who are in a more confused state. But a really important point is that if we've practiced letting go in this life, we will have an easier time in death. They call that first bardo the painful bardo of dying, mainly because people are so attached to the world and things in the world and people in the world, and so letting go is painful. But if we can get good at being less attached and hold on more lightly here, we can have a journey that's pain free. Um, if we can let go of believing we're a separate self, we can have a much easier time at death. It's wise to prepare and have a graceful, even beautiful passage. The last point and the highest teaching of the masters is that when we're in that middle bardo, that dharmata, that where all the near-death experiences happen, if we are highly accomplished meditators, we can see and realize the intrinsic awareness, the true enlightened nature of our own mind, as Unity calls it, the divine mind. And if we can realize that and maintain it, we will attain what they call Buddhahood, which is synonymous with awakened Christ consciousness. It is indescribable bliss. And at that point, there is no need to come back and to be reborn unless we choose to come back as bodhisattvas, to help others reach freedom from suffering. So, in closing, there is so much more. When I wrote this talk, I wrote 38 pages. I've just delved into the subject this week, and it's just made me want to learn so much more. I edited it down today, but I really encourage you to be curious and seek out the deeper teachings on this. I'd love to hear your experiences. I know we've probably all had very powerful experiences being that escort for someone else, and I would love to hear about those. But we can practice, and there are meditations. I actually had it in the talk and I cut it, but there's a beautiful meditation of practicing leaving the body. And I told my mom about it, and she was like, bring that up. Let's do that. So tomorrow we're going to practice that. But this is part of the journey of enlightenment. That's just part of it. So I hope this talk has been beneficial to your soul's journey. Thank you all. God bless.